Support for Steppin Out comes in part from the Kristovich family in honor of Mary Lou and Bill Kristovich. This program is sponsored in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support the arts and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
I'm Peggy Scott Laborde, and welcome to the web version of Steppin Out. For over 34 years, we've spotlighted the food, arts, and entertainment scenes. And now here's Ian McNulty, food writer for the Times Picayune, New Orleans Advocate.
Hi Peggy, hi everybody. Thanks for having me out on Stepping Out. Extraordinary circumstances, but so glad to be able to connect with New Orleans people on their favorite topic, dining, food, our food culture. I don't need to tell anybody here that we are living through unprecedented times, and yet things keep on changing in the restaurant world. Last week when I was talking with you, things were changing hour to hour. It was really hard to foresee where things would be even by the end of a day. This week things have settled in a little bit, but it is still incredibly topsy-turvy. Maybe things are changing day to day instead of hour to hour. For restaurants, what you're seeing is they're still under this mandate that they cannot do dine-in service, but they are allowed to do takeout, curbside, drive-through, that sort of thing. It's all aimed at minimizing contact between people so that they can slow the spread of this coronavirus. And restaurants have been very creative in accommodating this. I think what we saw last week was many restaurants giving it a shot. They just wanted to see what they could do. Desperate times. They wanted to keep a little bit of cash coming in, and what I hear from restaurateurs most of all, a few people at least working. And this week, the reality has set in that for a lot of restaurants, that's just not going to be viable. So we've seen restaurants that gave it a good try last week decide, no, okay, we're going to close, we're going to at least give it a breather, we're going to take a little time off the clock and see where things are in a few days, in a week, in 2 weeks. And yet many restaurants are persisting with it, and some of them are making it work. You know, changes from shop to shop, from restaurant to restaurant, from family to family, frankly. So if you're interested in supporting a restaurant and going out and having a meal and having a flavor that's familiar from before, there's still plenty of options out there, but just know that they may be changing frequently. And restaurants that you had heard were doing takeout or curbside last week maybe aren't this week, or maybe they've adjusted their options a little bit. It's going to continue to change. But the most important thing is we have a restaurant culture in this city. We have a food culture in this city. We have a community built around it. And people are going to find increasingly creative, generous ways to support that community and to feel like they're part of it as we go through this. And what happens on the other side of it all? That's up to New Orleans, right? It's going to be up to New Orleans people who have been here all along to come back out and to support the restaurants as they rebuild. No one's saying it's going to be an easy or short process, but if I know one thing about New Orleans, it's going to be done with a lot of heart.
What with local music clubs shuttered along with most everything else, New Orleans musicians are finding a new way to reach an audience. Here is Times Picayune, New Orleans Advocate's Keith Spera with news.
Hi, everybody. This is Keith Spera from the Times Picayune New Orleans Advocate. Normally, I cover music, and I still do, although obviously in the new coronavirus reality, the form that music has taken is a little bit different. I used to actually go to shows and festivals with other people and see music in clubs. Obviously, that's not happening now. The whole festival season for the spring, obviously normally the busiest time of year in New Orleans for music, has been essentially deferred to the fall. So we've basically taken the spring festival season and dropped it to the fall. The French Quarter Festival, of course, is going to be the first weekend in October. The New Orleans Jazz Festival is going to be in the fall. They have not said specifically which days yet. More than likely, It'll fall in those weeks right after French Quarter Festival and before the Voodoo Fest at the end of the month. So that'd be my guess, kind of mid-October, maybe the second and third weekends. But I think that's all up in the air, as that's obviously a very tricky process to reschedule 600 bands and put a whole new festival together when you've had several months to plan it the first time around. So don't envy the job that those guys over at the Jazz Fest office have. But at least they're still planning to have the festival, as is French Quarter Festival, so we'll have a lot of music come the fall. So what do you do in the meantime? Everybody knows that music can be very uplifting. We can all use a little bit of that right now, a little joy, but we can't go see it live because the bands can't play live, and you can't go really out of your house all that much anyway in the effort to stem the spread of the disease. Fortunately, musicians are by nature very creative people, and they figured out a way to make music and bring it to you, even though they can't do it in a public place. What they can do it is online. So they're bringing you a lot of music via technology, via live streaming, where they'll get on Facebook or Instagram or one of these other platforms and perform a show live. So you're watching on your computer in real time, and you could sit at home with your feet up and make yourself a drink, cut rate prices, and watch the show. And oftentimes these will be interactive performances where you can ask the performers questions or request songs, and it's a whole lot of fun, actually. I mean, not quite the same thing as being there in person, but it's not a bad substitute for the time being. So there are a couple of these of note that are coming up this week that you should maybe check out. First up is John Cleary. John, of course, the great keyboard player, singer, vocalist, who's been a mainstay on the New Orleans scene for 25 plus years at this point. Fluent in all the traditional New Orleans piano styles. Also writes great songs. He's toured with Bonnie Raitt and her band, toured with Dr. John and his band, with Taj Mahal, with John Scofield, all these great artists. But he's also led, of course, great bands of his own, including the Absolute Monster Gentlemen, one of the best funk and R&B bands that come out of New Orleans in the last 20 years or so. So John has started a thing with a great name. It's called the Quarantini Happy Hour World Tour. The Quarantini, obviously a quarantine version of the Martini, Happy Hour World Tour. So he's doing these shows from his house in the Bywater neighborhood, Funk Headquarters as he calls it. And the first couple editions was just him sitting at the piano by himself, playing songs, taking questions, telling great stories. Told a great one about going to a 4th of July barbecue at Keith Richards' house one time. And just being very casual. He sips on a Quarantini, but really shows you kind of the nuts and bolts of what he does. And it's real interesting to sort of watch him do his thing. So he's going to be doing a couple things in the upcoming week here. On Saturday, the 28th at noon Central Time, John is going to be giving a live piano lesson. That's going to be on his Facebook page, which is John Cleary Music on Facebook. John Cleary Music on Facebook. A live piano lesson with John at noon on Saturday. Then on Tuesday, the 31st, John's going to do another of his more looser kind of quarantini shows where he's going to be playing songs and taking questions and that sort of thing. That's going to be at 8 o'clock p.m. on Tuesday, March 31st, also at John's Facebook page. Another one worth mentioning on Saturday afternoon at 2 p.m. Central Time, Kermit Ruffins, of course, the quintessential New Orleans trumpet player, singer, character all around. He's going to be doing a show on his Facebook page, which is Ruffins BBQ, short for Ruffins Barbecue, on Facebook, starting at 2 p.m. on Saturday, March 28th. I've not seen him do one of these yet, so no telling what it's going to be, but knowing that it's what Kermit's all about, it'll be loose and fun, and I'm sure very interesting, and a little taste of live New Orleans music for you on Saturday. Now, those are the best ones coming up, but just a couple places you can go and check the schedule for more, including a website called sofakingfest.com, sofa-king-fest.com, which has a daily schedule of live streaming, not just in New Orleans, but around the world, as well as the Offbeat Magazine website where they have listings of streaming as well. So there you go. Until I get to see everybody again out in the clubs and about, we'll be on the live streaming music beat for the time being. Good luck, everybody.
For our nostalgic New Orleans vignette, let's look back at the ultimate gourmet grocery, Salieris.
The site of Mr. B's Bistro on the corner of Iberville and Royal Streets was once home to a grocery store that rivaled any food lover's wildest fantasy. A.M.&J. Salieris opened in 1864. Joseph Solari, an Italian immigrant from Genoa, was the proprietor. He initially opened a few blocks away, but settled in the Royal Iberville location for most of the grocery's history. Solari's carried imported liquor, cheeses, olive oils, pasta, and caviar. It was also known for its exotic fruits and vegetables. In 1877, Solari's was among the first businesses in New Orleans to install telephone lines. The grocery offered home delivery and their own in-house packaged brands. Solari's was sold to a new owner in the early 20s who retained the name, and in 1927 the interior was renovated to include a modern lunch counter, soda fountain, and expanded bakery. Solari's made its own candy. They were exotic specialties, including fresh eels and chocolate-covered ants. Also on view, open barrels of olives and pickles. A 1950 Gourmet magazine article declared it one of America's finest grocery stores. In the 1960s, supermarkets opened around the city, and business began to falter. In 1961, the building was sold and torn down to make way for a parking garage. While Solari's opened briefly on the ground floor of the new building, it closed in 1965, ending more than a century of doing business. In 1979, the Brennan family opened Mr. B's Bistro, ushering in yet another food-related establishment to continue in the footsteps of one of America's most fascinating food emporiums.
And now back to Ian.
Today is Friday, and unusual circumstances, but Friday in Louisiana during Lent means seafood. It especially means boiled seafood. This is our time for boiled crawfish, for shrimp too, sure. And that is a tradition that is persisting through all of this. One thing you'll notice around town is the smell of crawfish, and sometimes even the sound of crawfish boils happening. Now, all of this has to be radically reframed in the fight against coronavirus. You can't have the social aspects that you had before. You can't invite a lot of people over. You can't invite your mom and them to come over, right? But you still can gather with your small little family unit and have yourself some crawfish, a familiar flavor. Now, restaurants are limited to takeout only, so you're not going to restaurants for this. But many places that specialize in crawfish have adopted curbside service to make it happen under these circumstances. The markets that you go to for your favorite seafood all year long, those are food stores. Those are an essential service. Those are still open. So in many cases, the places where you went to get crawfish before, you can still find them now, even though you have to interact with them a little differently. Calling ahead, pre-ordering, all that is essential so you can just swoop in, pick this up, minimal contact, safe for everybody, bring it home, having it in small groups, but still enjoying that flavor, still enjoying getting your fingers in there and doing that with your favorite beverage perhaps next door to you. I've seen curbside crawfish, I've seen the markets doing their thing, and one thing that's held firm through the season has been good quality. Early in the season, before coronavirus became this gigantic crisis, we knew it was going to be a good crawfish season. The crawfish were pouring out of Acadiana. There was a very mild winter. So all of those things held up, and the crawfish harvest coming in is pretty good. Now, all of the economic disruption, that's been really hard on the crawfish farmers, the crawfish harvesters. Every piece of the puzzle down the line is impacted by this. But crawfish is coming into New Orleans. You can still find it at your favorite places. The prices are inexpensive, especially compared to seasons past, which is great because everyone's trying to stretch a buck. But it is possible to get yourself a little patch of crawfish and enjoy one of those rites of spring in Louisiana. If you're able to do so safely, I think it would be a good restoration for spirits this time of year. That's it for now. Thanks again, Peggy, for having me on, and good cheer and good health, everybody.
Here's Alan Smason of Crescent City Jewish News and TheaterCriticism.com with a roundup of the local scene and a little bit of Broadway.
Well, Peggy, the second week of in-place sheltering in shuttered theaters has sadly ended And we got some bad news from Broadway this week, and that is that the 75th annual Tony Awards, originally slated to be broadcast the first week of June, have been indefinitely postponed. This is the first time this has happened. And again, as soon as the Broadway theaters reopen and the nomination process can begin again, the Broadway League and the American Theater Wing will announce a date for that celebration to be broadcast over the CBS television network. We also got bad news out of Florida this week, the death of Terrence McNally, the eminent playwright. McNally, of course, had been the book writer for his Tony Award wins for The Kiss of the Spider Woman back in 1993, and then 5 years later, he won also another Tony Award for his book writing for Ragtime, the Stephen Flaherty and Lynn Ahrens wonderful piece. Now, he did not win Best Musical that year as he had done for Kiss of the Spider Woman because The Lion King won in 1998. However, he was an enthusiast for opera. He wrote librettos for opera as well and based the life of Maria Callas in his play Masterclass. He won a Tony for that as well as Love, Valor, and Compassion. He also, we should point out, won last year's Lifetime Achievement in Theater Award from the Tony Awards. So again, it is a sad event. He was 81 and had been a survivor of lung cancer and COPD. Again, he was more at risk than others, but he is the first major casualty of the pandemic that we all are living through right now. McNally did make it down to New Orleans to, guess where, the Tennessee Williams New Orleans Literary Festival back in 2008. He also was slated to be here at the time of the publication of his memoir in 2011. Unfortunately, he did not make it. But Thomas Keith, the preeminent Tennessee Williams scholar, did write the foreword for that book, and so it is sort of a shame that he didn't come down to be with Thomas. Again, we hope that those of you who were anticipating being at the Tennessee Williams New Orleans Literary Festival this week, will understand the reasons it was canceled. But know that they have already announced the dates for next year. It's up on TennesseeWilliams.net. And also, they have opened up early in April the time to start submitting one-act plays, short stories, and poetry. That'll start in April, and the competition will go until October. So those of you who are sort of in need of a fix, here you go. Stella! Okay, let's move on. There's some difficult decisions being made in theater these days, and again, one of those companies that's affected is Jefferson Performing Arts Society. I spoke with Dennis Asaf, and Dennis informed me that the Complete History of Comedy Abridged has been permanently abridged. Unfortunately, that will not go anymore. However, they are postponing their production of 42nd Street. The Phantom of the Opera star, Brad Little, was slated to be in that, but he lives in Korea and unfortunately will not be able to make it now with the pandemic. And so they have decided to enlist the services of Patrick Ryan Sullivan. Those of you may remember him from his work in Biloxi Blues, and also he was Billy Flynn in a production of Chicago recently. He's going to be taking over the role. A choreographer, Ken Beck, is supposed to be directing and acting as a choreographer for 42nd Street. They hope that it'll be on in May, but it's still sort of a waiting game at this time. Also want to remind everybody that their production of An American in Paris, which was slated to go on later in the year, has been postponed indefinitely. There are some difficulties with that. And also, I should say that all productions are right now on hold. The performance rights from the Dramatist's play service as well as from Samuel French are not being given out right now. No one in the world is being given performance rights, and right now we don't know whether or not they're going to be giving credits to companies who have not been able to perform the works, or whether they're going to give refunds. So this has never happened, and of course we're all sort of trying to figure it out as we go along. Also, the NOLA Project. They were supposed to be having their major annual fundraiser dinner this week. That didn't happen. So, of course, that impacts their final production and productions for next year. They get about 15 to 20% of their budget raised at that dinner. And Treasure Island, which had been slated to be produced and performed in the Sydney and Walda Best of Sculpture Garden, unfortunately is not going to go this year. They have postponed it for an entire year. It'll go in May of next year, and that's due to the fact that the heat index rises so much, and it really is not possible for the actors or the audience members to be comfortable when they're doing this. But they're looking forward to doing it next year. And as I mentioned, the NOLA project does depend quite heavily on the dinner, which was a 5-course dinner from 5 different restaurants around town. That brings up an interesting question. A number of fundraisers involve the charity of restaurants, like the Zoo to do. And the question is now whether or not this hard-hit restaurant industry will be able to bounce back in such a way that they'll be able to give charity to much-needed institutions. So a lot of fundraisers that we've been depending on may be hard hit to present them again next year because the industry is going to be in a recovery mode. Something to think about there. Also, on a more personal note, A.J. Allegra and his fiancee, Casey Thomas, he's seen here with another wonderful costume designer like Casey, that's, of course, Cecile Casey Covert. They were planning on getting married at a destination wedding in where? Italy. So that wedding is off. I guess the romantic in me and the Shakespearean lover would say that they were hopefully going to get married in Verona, but I'm not quite sure about that. But at any rate, they have decided to have a small, intimate ceremony here in New Orleans, and then think about maybe having that destination anniversary a year from now. So that's what's happening in theater, Peggy. Take it away.
But check out TennesseeWilliams.net. That's their website. That's the website of the festival. And you can see a list of all the writers who were going to be there. And maybe it'll give you some ideas for some great reading possibilities, too, including the biographer Nigel Hamilton and biographer Robert Mann. We'd like to conclude with thanking Kelsey Schreiber for helping us stitch this program together for our brand new web version, very first web version of Steppin Out here. And we leave you, thanks to our friends at WWL, with a clip from a concert that the opera singers Brian Hemel and his wife Irene gave for residents of Lambeth House last week. And so thank you for watching. Thanks for supporting WYES. And please spread the word that Steppin Out is still around, even under the challenging times that we're all experiencing. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.
Sei Laborde,